Hi, I'm Michael Dalto from the Maryland Department of Disabilities, and I'd like to talk to you today about what happens if you get SSI checks and you go to work. But first, many years ago, I was toilet training my son. One day decided that he was ready to go out on a test run. So he got dressed with his underwear, no diaper, and I strapped him into his car seat and went for about a 15-minute drive. Every single minute I turned around and asked him, "Do you have to go?" He kept shaking his head no. And I got to our destination, I parked the car, I unstrapped him, lifted him out of his car seat, and those of you who have children know what I discovered. He was soaking wet. So I looked at him and I said, "I asked you every minute if you had to go. Why didn't you say something?" He looked at me with these big innocent eyes and said, "But I wanted it to be a surprise." That was the day that I learned that my son might have a future working for Social Security, because you usually get the information you need from them, but it's often just a little too late. So I hope you're getting this information in a timely way before you start working, so you'll be prepared, because there are a variety of safety nets available to you if you're receiving SSI benefits and you go to work. First of all, what is SSI and how do you get it? SSI is a cash benefit that you can receive. It comes from Social Security. You can get it if you either have a disability that's significant enough that it really limits your ability to work, or you're at least 65 years old, and you have income and assets below certain limits. If you meet those criteria, you can get monthly checks from Social Security. Along with those monthly checks, SSI makes you automatically eligible for a medical benefit known as medical assistance. It's also called Medicaid. If you receive those benefits and you're used to getting the cash and the medical coverage every month, you might be frightened about what would happen if you started working. Here's where the safety nets come in, however. There are a variety of them, and I'd like to go through each of them. The first safety net is that you can work while you're receiving SSI checks, still get at least some of your SSI benefits, as well as keeping your medical assistance, or Medicaid. The amount that you can earn without impacting your SSI depends on how much SSI you had to begin with. But usually, if you start earning at least $85 a month, it can reduce but not eliminate the amount of SSI you're receiving. But here's a well-kept secret. If you go to work while receiving SSI, you are almost always better off working than not working, because for every $2 you earn, less than $1 of your SSI is reduced. For example, if you earned $1,085 a month in wages from a job, your SSI would not be reduced by that much, but by less than half, by only $500. So while you would lose some of your SSI, you'd be much better off because you'd have more than double that amount in earnings to offset it. So you can earn up to a certain amount depending on how much SSI you start out with, and still keep at least some of your SSI. If you started with the maximum SSI check, that's $674 a month in 2009, you can earn up to $1,432 a month before your SSI would be reduced to zero. At that point, you might be concerned about what would happen to your medical assistance benefits. But there's a protection for those as well. So, while you're working, you can keep some of your SSI benefits as well as your medical assistance until you're earning a certain amount, enough to bring your SSI checks down to zero. What happens if you earn more than that amount? Well, in that case, there's a second safety net that can enable you to earn even more and still keep some of your cash benefits as well as your medical assistance if you're paying for certain expenses needed for work. For example, if you pay for some disability-related expenses that are needed both for your disability and for work, they're known as impairment-related work expenses, Social Security gives you an allowance for those and will let you keep even more SSI while you're working. Examples would be specialized transportation, special adaptive equipment or assistive technology, attendant care services, medical services or supplies that you might pay for, etc. Secondly, if you're blind, you can get credit for any work-related expenses you pay for as a deduction. And that can even include money withheld from your pay to pay for taxes, meals you eat on the job, and just about anything else that's work-related that you pay for out of your pocket. That's another deduction to help you keep more SSI. If you'd like to pursue a work goal and submit something called a Plan for Achieving Self-Support to Social Security to help you reach that goal, and you pay for expenses to reach your goal, that's another deduction that can enable you to earn more and still keep some of your SSI checks. And finally, if you're a student under the age of 22, you're attending school, and you're working, you can get a special deduction just for being a student without having to pay for any of those expenses. So, all of those deductions can enable you to earn even more money and still keep at least some of your SSI checks. And along with the SSI, you keep your medical assistance card. But what happens if your earnings are high enough that even after any of those deductions, your SSI check is still reduced to zero? Well, you might assume that your medical assistance is going to go away then, because it was your SSI checks that made you eligible for medical assistance in the first place. But here's good news. There's a third safety net that's known as 1619B. And 1619B says, if your SSI checks are reduced to zero just because of your earnings and no other reason, you can still keep your medical assistance until you're earning much more money. In 2009, that amount is at least $37,517 a year in earnings. In some cases, particularly if you have high medical expenses or you receive publicly funded attendant care services, you can earn significantly more than $37,517 a year and still meet the requirements to keep your medical assistance. There's another benefit of 1619B, which is it keeps you on the SSI benefit rolls. What does that mean? That means even though you might not be receiving an SSI check because your earnings are too high, if your earnings drop or you stop working at any point, you can get your SSI checks back again without having to reapply. All you have to do is call your local Social Security office and let them know, and they can reinstate your SSI checks, often as early as the following month, and usually not more than 2 months after your earnings drop or end. So it's a great work incentive, particularly if you're concerned about losing that SSI for good or losing your medical assistance coverage. To qualify for 1619B, you have to have earnings below the limit. Again, that's $37,517 a year for most people, but on an individual basis can be even much higher if you have higher medical expenses than that. You have to keep your resources or your assets, things like bank accounts, stocks, bonds, investments, etc., below $2,000, or if you're married, below $3,000 for you and your spouse. You have to continue to use your Medicaid or need it. You can meet that requirement just by using it once a year. And you can't be found to have medically improved. Periodically, if you get SSI, Social Security will do a disability review. They call it a continuing disability review, to make sure your disability has not gotten better. They do a review of your medical records, your work history, etc. As long as they don't decide that you have medically improved, then you can continue to receive your Medicaid through the 1619B rule. Okay. Even if your earnings are too high to keep your Medicaid, your medical assistance, through 1619B, there's an additional safety net, which says that if your earnings later drop anytime within the next 12 months, you can still get your SSI checks back without having to reapply, simply by calling the local Social Security office. Here's another safety net. Even if you work your way completely off the benefits and beyond the 1619B limit, it's called Expedited Reinstatement. If you've reached that point in your work history and your earnings later drop or stop, you would have to reapply to get your SSI checks back again. But there's a quicker, easier way to do it. Expedited reinstatement is expedited. It's quicker, oftentimes as quick as a month, usually no more than several months to get an answer from Social Security about whether they're going to reinstate your SSI checks. It is easier. The burden of proof on you is a bit less than when you first applied for SSI benefits. And thirdly, and most interestingly, while you're waiting for a decision from Social Security, you can get checks, actual SSI checks, even though you've not yet been approved. You get these checks while you're waiting for a decision. Even if the decision is no, even if Social Security decided you would not get your benefits back, you don't have to return the checks that they gave you while you waited for a decision. I don't know of any other program that has that kind of provision. To qualify for expedited reinstatement, you have to have previously received SSI checks, lost them due to work, and in fact earned enough that you would no longer be in the 1619B status, which can be very significant, at least $37,517 a year, maybe more. You have to have lost the benefits due to work, then later stopped working or had your earnings drop low enough for you to get back into SSI check status or 1619B status, get your medical assistance. And you have to continue to have a disability that's either the same as or very similar to the disability for which you began to receive SSI in the first place. Finally, it has to be less than 5 years since you worked your way off the benefits to be able to qualify. So to summarize these safety nets, you can earn up to a certain amount of money and still keep at least some of your SSI checks and your medical assistance. If you earn above that amount, you may be able to still keep some of your SSI checks or keep your SSI checks higher if you have certain deductions. Usually, there are expenses that you pay for related to work, or if you're a student under age 22, you don't even have to pay for expenses. Those deductions can keep your SSI checks higher. Suppose you earn so much that even in spite of those deductions, your SSI checks still go down to zero. You're still protected by a rule that lets you keep your medical assistance and makes it easy to get your SSI checks back again if your earnings later drop or you stop working. If you earn so much that you can't even keep your medical assistance, which is going to be well over $37,000 a year, you can still be protected if your earnings later drop within the next 12 months. And finally, even if you've worked your way off all of the benefits, if your earnings later drop or you stop work within the next 5 years, you can get benefits back again more easily than if you were initially applying. You do still have to reapply, but it's a quicker, easier way to do it. So, I hope that you'll pursue more information about these rules as you get closer to finding work. And if you'd like to get details about how these safety nets, these work incentives as they're also known, can benefit you personally, please contact your rehabilitation counselor who can refer you to a skilled benefits counselor to walk you through. Thank you very much for your time and best of luck with your work pursuit.